Hi, and welcome to the morning of day one of making our gluten-free sourdough starter. So I've already made my brown rice sourdough starter. Now we're going to go ahead and make our sorghum sourdough starter. So one thing I did mention before that I would highly recommend, take a little book. If you have a little notebook and write in it in columns and write down your day one and the time that you fed your sourdough starter and how much. That way you can keep track. So if anything goes wrong, you can ask questions and get some help, and you don't have to make the same mistake again if you ever have to. And you can also help other people, your friends and family, if you want to share your sourdough starter. So first thing we're going to do is grab our glass container and we're going to weigh it. So we'll tear our scale and we're just going to weigh it. Take a piece of tape or just a wine glass writer and write how much it weighs on the bottom. That way you know for future reference, and we'll find out as the days go along why we might need that. Then you're going to tear it. Then you're going to take your fresh, unbleached, hopefully organic or not, doesn't matter, sorghum flour, and you're going to put in 30 grams of that to start today. So this is our morning, and it's about 2 tablespoons, but remember, weighing it is always the best because every flour weighs a little bit different and water weighs different than flour. So our 30 grams.
So how do you choose the right flour to make a sourdough starter with? The best type of flours to use are whole grain organic flours because they have more live microorganisms and nutrients due to the intact bran and germ. So what is a whole grain? Well, a whole grain has an outer layer called bran, which is a fiber-filled layer that is full of vitamins and minerals. And this is where the microorganisms live in nature. And then it has an inner layer called the endosperm, which is a starchy carbohydrate layer, which has some proteins and vitamins, but not a lot. And finally, it has a germ layer, which is the nutrient-packed core that is full of vitamins and minerals that make it the perfect food for the microorganisms to live on. On the other hand, we have refined grains like white rice flour, for example, which have been stripped of the outer layer of bran and the inner nutrient core or germ. And they are only left with the endosperm, which is the starchy layer, which is not very nutrient rich. Therefore, there's a lot less microorganisms living on a white rice flour, for example, or refined grain than there are on a whole grain. So whole grain flours are definitely the best choice, and superfine brown rice flour is an excellent choice. It's easy, reliable, and accessible to most people. And the really good thing is you can grind it to a superfine powder at home if you can't find superfine. Sorghum flour is an excellent choice and in fact is very underused in North America, but very widely used throughout the world. It's easy, reliable, accessible, and creates a beautiful, lively, bubbly starter with a fairly neutral flavor and high in protein. So it makes an excellent choice too. Of course, there are other flours that you can choose from, like millet flour or teff flour, for example. But I find some of them quite powerfully flavored, and so I like to use them to flavor my leaven, which I'll explain what that is later, rather than use them to make my starter. But ultimately, the choice is yours, and whichever flour you choose to use, you'll be successful.
And we're going to tear our scale. Now we're going to take our pineapple juice, and we put about a tablespoon, which is about 17 grams, give or take.
So why do we add the pineapple juice anyways? Well, the pineapple juice is very acidic. So in this way, it actually helps to jumpstart the bacteria and yeast activity. The acidity encourages the good microorganisms that we want to be within our starter to grow and to thrive. And in this way, it speeds up the process and helps avoid the growth of the unwanted bacteria that can make our starter smell really gross for the first 4 days.
And it's about 15 grams. So it doesn't matter exactly how much. You can put up to half of the amount of your liquid on your first day being the juice. I just like to put just a little to give it a little bit of a kick. And then we're going to take our water that's been sitting on the counter or your filtered water. Remember not to use a Brita filter or a carbon filter. So that's my 15 grams. I'm going to leave it at that. And I'm going to add now 15 grams of water to make it up to 30. Now that would be a 1-to-1 ratio of flour to liquid. Now, I find that with the gluten-free flours, 1-to-1 just doesn't cut it. The flour is really water absorbent. So I find you need to put a few more grams of water. And since I already found that out before, I'm just going to go straight ahead and add it now. So instead of just adding the 30, I'm going to go up to 35 grams. There we are. And then I'm going to show you what the consistency looks like. So we'll take it off here and we'll give it a nice stir.
So here's a close-up of our 30 grams of sorghum flour with our 15 grams of pineapple juice and 20 grams of water. And as you can see, it is a very, very thick paste, a lot thicker than our brown rice starter was, and it's definitely too thick. So if you're mixing up your flour and whichever type of flour you choose to use, you do not want it to be this thick. You want it to be a little bit more of a runny consistency. So I wanted to show you this so you have an idea. So we're going to add a little bit more water and give it a good stir and show you how it looks then.
I'm going to put it back on the scale and tare it. So now I know I've put 35 grams. So I'm going to just add a couple more grams.
So here we've added an additional 5 grams of water, which brings us up to 30 grams of sorghum flour with 40 grams of liquid. And as you can see, this is a lot more like our brown rice starter, a nice thick paste, not too thick. You can jiggle it. It falls off your spoon, but it doesn't pour off. So this is the consistency that you're looking for. So basically, depending on the type of flour you're using, mix it up and make it into a thick paste just like this one. So you may need to add a little bit additional water. Just make sure to stir it really well.
Now we're going to make sure we've scraped down the sides so that all of our flour and water and juice and microorganisms are together there. Then we're going to cover it up, or loose-fitting cloth and an elastic. And then we'll just take an elastic and we'll mark exactly where it started. So by taking this elastic and I usually use the top of the elastic as my marker line, then I can see exactly where my sourdough starter was before I fed it, or when I fed it. And then what I recommend is just writing on the side what it is, and of course in your notes. So we decided to name this starter Susie. Susie, the sorghum starter. So there you have it. There's our Susie. So now we'll be able to compare the two. And now on to making our regular, sort of like our control, our regular all-purpose flour sourdough starter. So now we have all 3 of our starters going. So we're going to set these on in a warm place. Some people suggest putting them in the oven with the light on. But if you're going to do that, just remember to be careful or put a sticky note over your oven, because I have heard horror stories of people forgetting that it was in there and turning on the oven. So I would recommend, if it's winter like it is here in Calgary, that you wrap them in a warm towel and just place them on the countertop. If you have a stone countertop like I do, they can be very cold. So you can place a warm towel underneath them.
So now where do we put our starter? Well, the ideal temperature is between 70 and 82 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 to 28 degrees Celsius. Now, if you live in a cold climate, that's going to impact your starter in that it's going to slow down its activity. So you need to keep your starter a little bit warmer, or as we'll find out later on, we can feed it less. If you live in a warm climate, however, that will increase the activity of your starter. So you'll want to keep it a little bit cooler or feed it more, which we will talk about later as well.
And then I'll come back later on today and feed them right around dinner time or closer to bedtime. We'll see you then.
Stick with me, and within 2 weeks, you will have the most beautiful, bubbly, active starter to make the most incredible bread with.